Hello, I'm Dr. Anna Davies-Barrett and I'm a lecturer in Archaeology at Cardiff University. I wish I could be here in person today, but unfortunately I'm just not able to, so let's hope this little online lecture is a good substitute. At Cardiff, we have a strong focus on archaeological science in our degree schemes and in our research into past peoples and the ways they lived. So I'm going to give you a taster of the kinds of scientific research we get up to and teach about in our archaeology department. My research focuses on looking at the development of diseases in past societies, how changes in living conditions, of different ways of procuring food, and of the development of larger cities and towns has affected what kinds of diseases people had and how frequently these diseases occurred. Today, I'm going to focus on a topic that has really come to the forefront in the past 6 months: respiratory disease. I think it's safe to say that the impact of COVID-19 on our daily lives now and in the future is dramatic. We have seen changes occurring that are going to affect society for a very long time to come. But what place does archaeology have in this conversation? We study past people, so what use is this to our current situation? Well, now, more than ever, understanding the risk factors that led to respiratory diseases in the past can help us to comprehend today's health challenges. By understanding how people lived with and dealt with diseases in the past, we can start to understand the history and complexities of our current circumstances. But firstly, how do we even begin to investigate diseases in past societies, particularly those societies that didn't have writing or other ways of recording the diseases they had? This is the field of archaeological research known as paleopathology, literally the study of ancient diseases. As paleopathologists, we look at what remains of people, normally their skeletons, to see if they had been affected by disease. Because we usually only have the skeleton remaining, the kinds of diseases we can investigate are usually limited to ones that affect bones. But this can still tell us a lot about past health and lifestyles, including what infectious diseases people might have had, whether they had a good access to nutritional food resources, whether people developed degenerative diseases, such as those affecting the joints, or had cancers and hereditary diseases, and even if they suffered from violence and trauma. So, how do I investigate respiratory diseases specifically? Often, when a disease affects the soft tissues of the body, like the muscles and organs, the area around a bone can become inflamed, triggering a reaction on the surface of the bone. I look for this reaction on specific bones to tell me if someone had a respiratory disease. So the upper respiratory tract is a layer of soft tissue that lines the nose and the sinuses, air-filled pockets in the bones of your face. These sinuses are located in your cheeks and your forehead. When the respiratory tract in the sinuses becomes inflamed, you develop a condition known as sinusitis. This is a really common disease. You might have already heard of it. It affects roughly 10% of adults. If you've ever had a blocked nose or aching in your forehead and cheeks, you might have actually had it too. Sinusitis is often caused by a blockage of the small drainage hole in the sinus. This leads to the accumulation of mucus inside the sinus, which in turn causes a nasty environment where bacteria can grow, causing the lining of the sinus to become even more inflamed. It's this kind of inflammation that can trigger new bone to form inside the sinus. It's this evidence, this new bone, that I can look for in ancient skulls to see if past people had sinusitis too. I can also use the same technique to look at lower respiratory tract diseases, usually affecting the lungs. These can be much nastier and deadlier than sinusitis, often including infectious diseases like tuberculosis and pneumonia. In this case, infection becomes established in the lungs and can spread, causing inflammation of not only the lung tissue, but the membranes that cover the lungs, known as the pleurae. The ribs lie directly on top of these membranes, so when inflammation occurs, this can trigger new bone formation on the inner surface of the ribs. So to see if someone in the past might have had inflammation of the lower respiratory tract of the lungs, I look for this new bone formation on ribs. In this way, I can calculate how often this new bone formation occurs and how frequently people in a certain past society or group were affected by respiratory diseases. Diseases like sinusitis or lung infections such as tuberculosis or pneumonia. What myself and other researchers have found is that the environment a group of people lives and works in is likely to have a significant effect on how often they were affected by respiratory disease in the past. Risk factors for developing respiratory diseases are numerous, but air pollution plays a large part in this. It's likely you've read in news headlines about the dangers of air pollution on your health, but this isn't just a modern day phenomenon. We have found that past people with higher frequencies of respiratory disease were often exposed to air pollution in industrial urban environments or from certain occupations, lifestyles, or housing conditions. Alongside this, poorer household sanitation and poor nutrition, as well as other factors, are all likely to have played a part in the development of respiratory disease. Living conditions that are again particularly common in past urban environments. One of the really interesting things to come out of my research is the effect of climate. To do this, I looked at the skeletons of people from Sudan from different time periods. Over the past 7,000 years, Sudan has changed from a region that was humid and covered in grassland and swampland to the hyper-arid desert known today. I looked at groups from different time periods ranging from the Neolithic, around 5000 BC, when it was much more humid, to the very arid medieval period. What I found was that respiratory disease was much more common after the Neolithic period, when Sudan was becoming more and more arid. This is likely because the desert environment that developed introduced pollution in the form of dust and sand into the air. These small particles enter the respiratory tract, causing inflammation and increasing people's susceptibility to infectious respiratory diseases. Today, sandstorms in Sudan are common and can greatly increase the amount of dust in the air for extended durations of time. We know too that increased windblown sand was already an issue in parts of ancient Sudan because we have temple inscriptions from the ancient town of Kawa that date to the 7th century BC. Here, rulers noticed the rising levels of sand, which were completely burying temples and roads, and they ordered it to be cleared. When the site was excavated recently, workers also faced issues from these same sandstorms, and when I came to analyse the skeletons from this site, I found that sinusitis was super common. So it's possible that the encroaching desert in Sudan had a negative impact on respiratory health in later time periods. But the picture is much more complicated than that. The lifestyle in the earlier Neolithic period may have also had fewer other risk factors for respiratory disease, leading to lower rates. People were leading hunter-gatherer lifestyles with some early agricultural and pastoral activities. Spending more time outside and remaining active whilst living in small communities that moved around a lot prevented settlements from becoming too polluted and stopped infectious diseases developing and spreading. In the later periods, when people relied on more intensive agriculture to procure food, living in larger sedentary settlements and even forming large towns and cities, people may have been exposed to greater risk factors, such as smoke inhalation from cooking fires or from activities like pottery production and metalworking, or even from poor sanitary conditions and diseases from animals. In fact, some of the highest rates of respiratory disease I found in Sudan were in groups from urban towns and cities, where air pollution from industrial activities would have been greater, sanitation poorer, and a greater number of diseases present due to higher levels of contact with people travelling and trading from all over the region and further afield. Having access to better resources because of your race, social standing, or your wealth can also greatly affect whether or not you develop a respiratory disease. Research has found that in some past societies, even if two groups live very close together in the same general environment, there could still be significant differences in how susceptible these groups were to respiratory disease, all based on their socioeconomic circumstances. This is likely because people with poorer access to resources were not able to afford the same levels of sanitation and cleaner burning fuels within their homes. Their nutritional intake may have been poorer, and they may have had to work jobs that expose them to greater risk factors for infection. These findings aren't actually much different today, where people from poorer backgrounds, ethnic minorities, and people from urban environments are greater affected by COVID-19, difficulties we should all remain aware of. I'm now expanding my research, looking at past people from other desert environments to see if the pattern I noticed in Sudan occurs elsewhere. Most recently, I participated in an excavation of pre-Columbian skeletons from Peru, these skeletons were also buried in a desert. And I found that this population also has a high frequency of respiratory disease, again pointing to a potential link between respiratory health and past dusty or polluted environments. It's easy to think that the respiratory problems of ancient people are a thing of the past, as our healthcare systems and ways of living have developed. But as we've quickly learned in the current pandemic, many of the same risk factors are really common today. Travel and trade are at a global scale, with urban and arid environments predicted to increase dramatically in the years ahead, with global warming and increasing population size, leading to even greater air pollution. By understanding how respiratory disease affected people in the past, we can better prepare ourselves for this future by educating new generations about these risk factors, using archaeology to tell these stories.